Did anyone notice I strategically sat in this chair because I'm not interviewing tonight, so I'm gonna give space to that chair? Well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. It feels really alive in this room. That's a good thing to feel. Tonight I'm going to be presenting about psychedelic sex and how we together can find God in the places we're told not to look. And we'll be unpacking that title in greater detail. Before we get started with that, I would like to lead a little meditation if you're open to joining me. If it feels good to uncross your legs, that's how I like it, just to really feel grounded. If you want to free your hands, and just as many breaths as we can utilize to drop ourselves into presence, you can let that begin now, breathing in. Open mouth. Breathing in. Let it go. And as you bring your awareness inwards, really focus on where you're seated. And feel the weightedness in your bottom, maybe your feet on the floor. And just start to connect to your body using your breath. And notice, if you can, use your exhale to soften your body. Maybe let that exhale come from the jawline or the shoulders. And just noticing any areas where you may be holding tight. And that's okay, but when you acknowledge that tightness, invite it to soften. If you would like, bring a hand to the heart space. And just start to feel in to the very center of your chest. You may feel your heartbeat. You may feel the rise and the fall of your breath. And we center into the heart because this is where we can reorganize our energy. Landing in this powerful energy center of self-compassion. Just taking a couple of breaths, really focusing on that connection. I'd like to lead us in some breaths together, producing an audible exhale. So to prepare, let go of all of your air through your mouth. Breathe in fully. Beautiful. We'll do two more just like that. Breathe all the way in and down. Just feeling that resonance as we unify in the heart field. And keeping the eyes closed for a few moments longer, you can release your hands away from your body, and if you want to drop your head side to side, take a stretch with your chin down to your chest. Just taking whatever gentle movement in your seat you would like to. And use your next few mindful breaths to open your eyes and join again in community in this space. Thank you for joining me. What I observe is when we make noise through our open mouth, it gives permission to everyone else around us to make noise too. Because that wouldn't be as comfortable if you were alone in the grocery store, right? Or at work, or even around people who know you very dearly. It might feel out of character or weird if mom or dad just starts sighing. So I wanted to bring us into that space because today we're going to be talking a lot about sexuality. And for those of you who don't know, I am actually an intimacy, relationship, and sexuality professional. And I have a coaching company upstairs here at Loto Studios. And for myself, sexuality is a very powerful modality for healing. And this may be a concept some of us are familiar with, and this may be brand new to you. So I invite curiosity and openness as we continue into this discussion. When I invite us to unify in breath, there is an intimacy to that. And we'll be speaking to intimacy a lot today as well. So I just wanted to thank you all again for joining me tonight. I'm noticing within myself a vulnerability as I start to speak to what I am so passionate about. And so I just want to give myself permission to pause and breathe and to ground. Because when we bring up these topics that are taboo, like psychedelics and sex, it can activate trauma. It can feel like a lot. And so if you feel a lot or if trauma is activated for you, that's okay. Let's all anchor back together when we notice that. So this first slide is outlining what I will firstly describe as the intentions in which people utilize psychedelic medicine. And my twist is that these same intentions can be applied to psychedelic sex. You know, many people enter the psychedelic space for therapeutic intention. And I believe that sexuality can be treated the same way. And so I'm talking about releasing trauma, restructuring your energy body. To me, these are two descriptions describing the same thing. And we're gonna get into greater detail. I'll also mention this notion of ego dissolution or experiencing unity. In one of our roundtables recently, we had a woman who was a BUFO facilitator sort of bring in this idea that is it death or is it unity that you experience on that medicine? And I've personally experienced really powerful sexuality that has brought me there as well. I also want to talk about the recreational intention of wanting to get high and feel pleasure. And that in our society, there's sometimes shame and wrongness around that intention. And so I'm the first to give you full permission to want that. And that there is a way to desire ecstasy and pleasure that is still conscious and connected to the heart. And so I'll be weaving a lot with this heart-centric intention tonight. And there's many reasons for that, but I'm sure you all felt it in the meditation to some degree. When we are connected to our heart, we are able to integrate aspects of ourselves that have become disconnected, either due to social cultural programming or just our own internal process, perhaps what we've carried over from past lives. And so as we bring those aspects into our heart space and focus on feeling self-acceptance, that's really the formula for healing that I advocate for and support people in finding within themselves. So I mentioned at first that all of these are intentions of the psychedelic experience, which can also apply to psychedelic sex, which I'll be defining here in a moment. But I did put on here expanding your multiple orgasmic potential. I would say that intention is more specific to psychedelic sex. Perhaps you want to go into a psychedelic journey with that intent, and I think that could be effective. And for many people, multiple orgasms may feel super far out, and that's okay. I just invite you to track that within yourself, just noticing what arises as they bring language to this opportunity. And many people do associate multiple orgasms to the female body. And I want to debunk that and say that all bodies are capable of experiencing multi-orgasms. We'll talk more about that in a moment. I just want to check in with the audience. Based off of this first slide and the intentions that are listed, do you feel connected to these intentions personally? Like you're interested in releasing trauma, restructuring your energy body, experiencing unity? Can I see a show of hands? You're like, yeah, we're into that. Great. I feel unified with you all already. So my next few slides are sort of outlining the social, cultural definition of psychedelics, sex, and finding God where we're told not to look. And so when people hear psychedelics, people like my mom, she thinks like reality is dissolving, you're not gonna pay your bills, fear of the bad trip. And I also see often when I speak to people outside of this community, people hear psychedelic and they think hallucinogenic. And so this may not be your reality, but I am painting a picture of a very heavy social script that I am attuned to with people that I speak with. This next definition of sex in the cultural sense is very heteronormative, intercourse often. Sex with a penis and a vagina. Let's take a breath with that. Let's take another breath with that. And tonight, I really hope to expand your definition of sex, sexuality, and intimacy, because these are complex and dynamic terms for us all to land in our own subjective definition of, but it's so empowering in self-relationship and in interpersonal relationship to have clarification between each of those terms and how we can achieve that in the way that we want to experience it. I also put on here that sex orients around the genitals and is a frictional physical experience. And so tonight, I hope to expand your perspective that this act of psychedelic sex doesn't need to be an act of friction or physicality and can actually be a really incredible, highly energetic experience. I also put on there that it's private or something to be shared with one person. And so I hope to expand everyone's just safety in owning that sexuality is desired, that pleasure is desired, and that we can drop into safety and permission to want that. And that our courage in ownership of this will create new conversations, will activate a shift in consciousness. And it's happening right here, right now. So finding God. Someone already asked me tonight if I'm religious. The answer is no. And I do deeply resonate with many core essential principles of various religions. And I do connect with God. It's through sex and psychedelics and many other ways. But tonight, we're not talking about the tyrant, male-bodied God that lives in the sky. And we're not here to save ourselves from eternal hell. We are, in a way, but not a distant hell, the current hell of the suffering you experience. And again, it's here. And this concept of sin and shame is so deeply within us as a culture. Even as someone who was not particularly raised with religious trauma, there is impact in every social circle, in every school, in all the TV. There's a heavy psychic messaging. And so there's an acknowledgement of that within us somewhere, that story of sin, that shamefulness may be present. And so later on in the presentation, I'll be talking about how we can depersonalize the energy blockages that we experience to allow our full expansion and liberation. And shame is one of those things. Trust me, you don't have to figure out where it came from. You don't need to know its origin to liberate yourself of that weight. So I would now like to introduce my personal definitions that I will be anchoring my presentation into tonight. Starting with psychedelic being a way of being. And you guys probably know someone who's like a trippy dude. And like, yeah, that's kind of what I mean. There is a way to hold this embodiment of being connected to everyone and to the world around us. And that's likely what you've experienced with psychedelic substances. Also, this acknowledgement of deep feeling. You know, many psychedelic experiences lead us into our bodies in new ways, as does sexuality. And so there is a discovery to hold that connectivity just as we exist outside of the medicine space, outside of the sexual space. As I mentioned, sexuality can be a vibrance. It can be an energy that we hold. It doesn't require movement, physicality, especially doesn't require a partner, and I'll be speaking more to that in a bit. Sexuality is associated with creation. And so when we're not creating a baby, we are creating something, and that's either an unconscious process or something that we put conscious intent towards. And so that is a consideration of how we can begin to integrate more psychedelic sex into our life, again, solo or partnered, but with these intentions of revitalization and becoming renewed. And I really believe that sexuality and pleasure are deep medicine. And there's a honing for all of us to come into of that power. Because it's not outside of ourselves, it's something that we create. Finding God, and God representing love and truth, right? And maybe there's another word that feels good to you. But when we talk about finding God, tonight we're talking about finding love. The unconditional type of love that allows us to be exactly who we are. And that's why I led us into the heart space, because we can begin to accept ourselves as we are and cultivate a deep self-love, finding God within ourselves. We're told not to look to sexuality or drugs, and maybe it's because that can be the catalyst for our awakening. I'm wanting to create this analogy of the psychedelic journey being similar to opening psychedelic sexual space. Again, a partnered exploration or a solo exploration. And the same way you have set and setting with a psychedelic experience, we can bring that into sexuality. And so I'm going to be discussing setting the container, which is partially consciousness and framework, which will be important to agree upon if you are exploring with a partner. But this first bullet I have says sacred sexuality, which can be really contradicting to those who have a heavy religious imprint. And so there's a discovery of finding the sacredness in all of our humanity, and that includes the aspect of ourselves that desires to feel sexual pleasure, that desires to feel desired. There can be a sacredness in everything that we experience when we choose to lean in and be curious. And so when I talk about sacred sexuality, I'm talking about this practice of cultivating sexual energy for these intentions of expansion and liberation and finding God. And it really comes down to mindfulness. And what has happened culturally is things have gotten really fast. And many people in sex or in intimacy are moving really quickly in a very robotic and disembodied, disconnected from the heart type of way. And so building a foundation of mindful awareness is essential in the psychedelic sex practice that I'm describing. And it all comes down to feeling. And the breath is a really powerful tool to bring us into our feeling body. So let's do it together. Let's take a deep breath in. Breathe out through your mouth. One more while we're here. Beautiful. So when things get a little heady, when the energy rises and we want to bring it down, that's how. You have full permission from me to sigh out as much as you desire tonight and always. Sound is another powerful medicine we have access to in our own being. The vibration and the tonality of our voice actually creates a soothing for our soul. And that's why affirmations are trendy in the healing space. And I think there is something to that. Right? And so for many people in sexuality, energy gets stifled around the throat. And so we start here in our mindfulness basics, just in this practice of sighing and opening the mouth and letting go, just to get familiar with that. I'm loving watching all of you just find the moment of please continue. When I'm talking about feeling, I'm speaking to a multidimensional type of feeling. Because you can feel where your hands are on your body. You can feel where your heart is beating in your chest. And then there's another type of feeling that is more attuned to energy. That might be an energetic sensation or an energetic sense. I'm sure many of you consider yourselves empathic or sensitive, and where you can either witness or feel in another person where their energy may be moving. And so that is something that is also very relevant in this topic of psychedelic sex. In the sacred sexuality space, releasing attachment to outcome is essential. Because as I was speaking to a moment ago, sex can get really fast. It can get really confusing when it happens so quickly as well, because it's so oriented around orgasm. And culturally speaking, it's oriented around male orgasm. And so we're bringing in this idea of releasing attachment to outcome, again, similar to the psychedelic journey, which really allows a full surrender to the experience. And that's where we find presence, vice versa. Embodied self-responsibility. I laugh because this is one of the things that is the most challenging for me to actualize personally, and also the core fundamental teaching of everyone that I work with in a coaching capacity. And so what I mean by self-responsibility is that everything I experience is fully my responsibility. That means if I feel sad or angry, there may be a story that you caused me to feel this way. But a more advanced perspective would say, I'm feeling anger, and it was activated when. And the embodied self-responsibility is weaving with my tools of mindfulness and breath so I can actually alchemize or metabolize that energy rather than repressing or suppressing that trigger. And so I encourage a witnessing of yourself in the, it happens so instantaneously, the desire to project or put outside of yourself what you're feeling. And it's actually really empowering when we take ownership, when we take responsibility of what's occurring within ourselves. And so it's something to explore, and principles of empathic communication and nonviolent communication can be really supportive to starting to create a habit around this style of communicating. I want to paint a picture of how this is also related to experiencing the sexuality and intimacy that you ultimately desire. If you know that there's an experience that you want to have, you cannot just be mysterious and think that your partner is reading your mind. Even if they have that ability, it's for your empowerment to speak directly to what you want to experience or what you've been experiencing that doesn't actually resonate for you. And when you and your partner or whoever you're relating to can meet each other in this embodied self-responsibility, that's when you're just encouraging each other to rise, to become more integrated, to become more whole. And that's really what is available as we integrate these principles. Again, I'm just using this example of psychedelic sex tonight, but this is really universal. And so I hope this information lands with you in some way where you can find it applicable in your life and in your relationships. So similarly, vulnerability and authenticity are essential as well. It's super vulnerable to open up and share what hasn't been feeling good relationally, let alone sexually, right? Because there is a fear of how you will be received by whoever you're speaking to, a lover or otherwise. And so these two pieces go very closely together, vulnerability and self-responsibility. So I'll share personally that I might lead and say, I am really afraid of how you are going to respond to this. But to be totally transparent, the way that you were offering me massage on my shoulders didn't feel like you were totally present with me in that experience. And it actually made it more challenging for me to receive because I was thinking about what you were thinking about. Whoa, is that what I just heard? Right? And so this narration of what we're experiencing in real time is what will lead to real-time solutions, so nothing gets swept under the rug. I also want to mention, sometimes I speak to people and they don't know what their authentic expression is. They don't know what is authentic to them. And I just want to say, if that's you or if you feel that way sometimes, that's okay, and I really understand. I really do. And my encouragement for anyone who is wanting to find their authentic voice, I want to encourage you to be forward in that intent in your communication. You may notice robotic or cyclical tendencies in yourself, and as soon as you see them, you can share, whoa, I don't actually know if this is my authentic truth. I might just be going through the motions here because I think that's what you want. Is this really what you want? Right? Next level vulnerability and communication and embodied self-responsibility. Surprise, connect to the heart. Love, acceptance, and gratitude. I coach a lot of men, and they often have a hard time with the emotional range of their humanness. And they might feel shame, and then they're angry that they feel shame. They might feel sad, and then they feel angry that they feel sad. And so there's a mentalism of judgment that happens so quick that creates an experience to be prolonged longer than it needs to be. And so again, I led us to the heart because that is our most powerful energy center for alchemizing these aspects of ourselves that we deem dark, that we deem negative, that we make wrong. And simply by landing into the heart space and being able to accept what you cannot yet accept shifts your vibratory state. So I'll mention with the heart space as well, when we have heart-opening experiences, it's common to feel grief in that process. It's normal for what has hardened and calcified to start to crumble, and sometimes that feels like death because a part of you is dying. And so we land in the heart to be gracious with ourselves. First with ourselves, and then we're able to extend that out to each other. And so I gave this statement as an example of having gratitude for the medicine. Thank you for showing me where I can expand awareness and heal. And so I can say that to my anger. I can say that to my sadness. I can say that to my mushrooms when they're coming on strong, right? The way that I am having gratitude for the medicine, it doesn't matter what the medicine is, as I resonate in the heart space of gratitude, I am healing in this practice. And I put in here that heal means to become more whole. And so as we integrate all of these lost aspects of ourselves back into the heart field, that is where we gain our self-knowing of what is truly us versus what we experience in the reflection of others versus what we receive from the spiritual dimensions. And so your heart space is a very powerful tool. And if you leave with anything tonight, I really hope it is that. So the heart space is one of the 7 chakras. And in my work, I reference the chakras a lot because I think it's a beautiful visual and a super helpful compass. I'm going to be speaking for the next few slides about what I am going to call the detrimental energies that block our chakras from having free-flowing life force. And so when we consider we've had these lifetimes in this incarnation where certain triggers or emotional activations have happened and we haven't been fully resourced to metabolize that emotional energy, it is being remembered in your body. And maybe it's expressing in physical ailment, or maybe it's just existing in an energetic dimension. I'm going to be speaking to how we can utilize this psychedelic sex framework to actually unwind and unfurl these stagnancies from our energy body so we can restructure, become empowered, and feel more flow state. I'm wanting to talk about how we are all connected to spirit, and flow state was like the way that it came through. But when you're existing just ego forward, that's so exhausting because you're trying to do it all alone. Yeah. And so there's a way to open up to greater flow, and we'll be talking more about that. So many of us don't speak our truth or don't act on what we really want because of fear of abandonment or fear of rejection. And so this is another powerful thing that we can use that affirmation for. Thank you for showing me. Thank you for showing me where I can more fully integrate. That's another piece that you can lead with if you are speaking to someone, partner or otherwise. I feel afraid to share this piece because I really don't want to be rejected. You know, they don't have to change if you share that. That just gives a weight off of your own chest. And that's in the root chakra where we hold fear. So just take an internal check-in real quick. Notice if you're holding any tension anywhere in your body. Let's take an exhale together, just straight away. Nice. Take a full breath in. Let it go. Check in with your anus. If you're holding tight, exhale from there. If you tightened because I said anus, take an extra exhale. Cool. Thank you for breathing with me. Feels good. The sacral chakra is where our sexuality exists, and also where we hold the detrimental energy of shame. This can also be debated that this is where we hold guilt. But for me, it's just any repressed creative energy or repressed sexual energy. Next, we have the solar plexus, which is our energy center of individual identity. And so for many that I work with, there's a challenge in being authentically who they are. And I feel that is often associated to a block in the solar plexus, of feeling guilty for your mere existence, or that that is wrong. There is a way to transcend that, I ensure it. I also feel it's associated to unprocessed anger. And so again, anger, thank you. Thank you for showing me where I can become more integrated. It's a very powerful emotion to tap into and hone. Unprocessed resentment and sadness or grief can block the heart space. And in the throat, unexpressed truth, preference, or desire. Also people-pleasing tendencies, which I know I've spoken to many people who have these tendencies and they're so aware. They're so aware of exactly what they're doing to people please, which is very interesting to me. My invitation is to utilize your solar plexus willpower to end that cycle and to be able to share, oh, I'm noticing the tendency to want to maintain a positive energy in relationship to you, and so I'm behaving in this way to keep this good vibe, and I'm really afraid of things changing. I just want to empower all of you to be the courageous one to break these patterns. It's for your empowerment and the person that you're relating to. So in the upper chakras, disconnection from the natural world or spirit can block the crown. Hopelessness and victimhood also blocks the upper chakras. Victimhood is what I would say is the opposite polarity to embodied self-responsibility. So the narrative of victimhood is, you did this to me, I'm angry because of you, or some version of that, right? So embodied self-responsibility is, I am experiencing anger, anger is moving through me, I'm feeling angry in your reflection, right? There's an artistry to proclaiming that in an embodied way. And so all of these detrimental energies exist within us. Whether we have awareness of them or not, I think we all, to some degree, have had impact. Again, social, cultural, familial, just based off of what we've been exposed to. I also, in my personal passion, think that we can take on energy empathically. And so that's why I was sharing a few moments ago about releasing the story of why we feel a certain type of way, and just integrating that feeling through an expanded heart space, because it's possible that energy was not ours, generated within us, but potentially something that stuck empathically. And when we share sexuality, that really opens our energy body to be more susceptible to these energies. And so it's important to release the story. You don't have to figure it out, just anchor back into your tools for alchemy. So when our chakras are having free-flowing energy move through them, we feel safety and abundance in our root. And we feel open and expressed sexuality and creativity in our sacral. And we feel an empowered sense of I am presence in our solar plexus. Our hearts are open to love and gratitude. In our throat, we're authentically expressed. And our third eye, we're connected to intuition and visionary and dreaming. And in our crown chakra, we have a connectedness and a unity. So with an awareness of these energy centers, I find it actually really helpful alongside these principles of self-responsibility and communication. Because if I'm feeling a tightness in my heart or in my throat, but I don't know what's going on, I can just start by naming that. My throat feels tight. That will always lead me to expanded awareness. And that gives who I am speaking to the opportunity to inquire, to see me deeper, to relate to me in a more intimate way. So that piece of vulnerability is actually what permits deeper intimacy. So I'm going to begin talking about psychedelic sex in practice, first as a solo practice. And so I'm describing this as a solo self-pleasure practice. The words you may more commonly know are masturbation, right? To jerk off or to jack off. And all of these words have a very heavy collective psychic charge of wrongness, of shame, of disruption is actually what masturbation means. And so we can proclaim our desire to feel pleasure in a self-pleasure practice. Again, let's zoom out. Doesn't have to involve genitals. It totally can, doesn't have to. Doesn't have to involve a physical act. You can have a friction-free pleasure practice. I would actually argue that that is a more advanced state. So it will always begin with your mindful awareness of your body and your breath. And sometimes when I speak to people about their self-pleasure practice, there may be in a relationship, maybe a long-term relationship, and it feels really challenging to find a solo self-pleasure practice, time and space. And so I do want to encourage the exploration of the non-sexual pleasure practices. And those can be things like stretching, dancing, self-massage, and I also put mirror work. Witnessing yourself nude, looking yourself in the eyes, right? You must activate your solar plexus, your willpower, to bring yourself there. And once you're there, you may have various different narratives fire, and you'll remember to land into your heart space to integrate all of those aspects that feel judgment and shameful. And this can be a really empowering practice to reclaim your body and the beauty of your individuation. So I just wanted to make that note for the particularly long-term relationship, partners who live together and your partner doesn't know that you're curious about the psychedelic sex pathway or using sexuality for healing. Your solo practice can begin outside of the genitals. And with these intentions of, I'm just going to lean into this mirror work example for a little bit longer, but eye gazing with yourself in the mirror may evoke sadness. It may evoke other feelings. Maybe you do feel anger in that. And so again, in this framework, I'm emphasizing you don't have to figure out why you're feeling what you're feeling, but landing back into your mindfulness practice of using your breath, using your body to soften and release that energy. And I continue to test that out to see how it feels for you, but it's my guess and my personal experience that it'll feel like freedom on the other side. There's also, when I speak to people about self-pleasure, which I do often, especially men, there's a forgotten piece of the foreplay. And when I speak to men who are sexual with women, they're like, oh yeah, 45 minutes on the timer for the foreplay with her. And I'm like, how many minutes when you're with you? And it's like totally forgotten. So there is a warming of your physical body and an opening of your energy body, not just speaking to male bodies, speaking to everybody on this. And it starts with your mindfulness practice, with your breath, with your softening and release. And also yoga, dance, listening to music, self-massage can be really helpful to that opening as well. Going to speak into deep armoring. So when I talked about the detrimental energies that are stuck in the chakras, they can be released, and there's many modalities that we can utilize to release that energy. Massage being a very powerful modality anywhere in the body. That mindful touch for trauma release can specifically be brought in male bodies to the penis and the prostate, for female bodies in the vagina, and for all bodies, full body, but especially the abdomen, the jawline, and the throat as well. And so in this concept of self-pleasure, we can weave with these psychedelic sex intentions of releasing trauma, becoming more empowered. And as we do so, that is what expands our ability to feel joy, to feel pleasure and peace as a more sustainable embodiment. This is also what leads us to our multi-orgasmic potential. I want to revisit an earlier intention of releasing expectation or releasing attachment to outcome. Your pleasure practice does not need to end at orgasm. It doesn't ever need to be about orgasm. Maybe you even explore this space with the intention of not orgasming. So there's a lot to play with here. And I want to speak to capacity. And for those who are connected to their body and their breath, you're able to track when you're at energetic capacity, or maybe intellectual capacity. And that's that moment where you're like starting to drift, or you're like thinking about the next thing, or you've just gone into a trance state where you're no longer fully present with what is current. And so the same is true in sexuality, and the same is true in psychedelics. And so I encourage you to track and be aware of your capacity. And rather than going into that edge where it becomes disembodied or disassociative, backing off a little bit. And again, that's your willpower, your ability to slow down, your ability to take a breath and to lead yourself there. And just generally speaking, I really encourage a solo self-pleasure practice for all bodies, all people in partnership. There's so many benefits that I'm not naming, including immunity boosting, but it's just overall a feel-good practice when we can know ourselves and be connected to ourselves through the felt experience and the energetic experience. And so we can utilize this sexual energy that we cultivate in our own body to lead us to this remembrance of godliness, of wholeness, of sacredness within ourselves. And that rubs up right alongside the necessity to unwind the shame story, to release the guilt, to release the grief. And the same goes in our partner practices. So when I'm speaking to partner exploration, I'm kind of speaking to a specific context where your partner knows also. So sharing intentions, desires, and boundaries is essential. And this is vulnerable in itself. Again, especially if you are in a long-term partnership. I have many, many prompts. I will continue to riff with this one, but it's this coming forward. And I like to narrate, this is vulnerable for me to share. But I'm interested in approaching our sexuality in a new way. This is hard for me to talk about, but I've been exposed to this idea of psychedelic sex, and it's something that really resonates, and I want to explore it further. I'm encouraging these conversations in what I call a low-risk environment. So it's not when you're already naked and under the sheets. It could be. It's just a little bit trickier. Okay. I want to encourage this conversation when you're feeling regulated and grounded in your nervous system, when you're feeling connected to your embodied self-responsibility, and when you're feeling compassionate for yourself so you can extend that compassion to whoever you're speaking to. And so I'll offer that for many people who come to this degree of consciousness in sacred sex or psychedelic sex, they maybe did experience direct sexual assault or trauma that they're wanting to heal through new felt experiences of sexuality. And this is a lot of the work I do professionally as well. So talking about that with your partner, if you do have a specific trauma or imprint in your mind or body, that could be a tender thing to hold awareness of in your exploration. Cultivating safety, multidimensional type of safety. And again, for you to embody in self-responsibility, your mindfulness principles and your expanding tool set of breath and body awareness will always lead you there. And co-regulating with your partner can be a really powerful exercise to co-create a sense of safety. Right now I'm talking to somatic safety, so when you feel grounded and relaxed in your nervous system. And also emotional safety. So I'm just double downing on this principle of embodied self-responsibility. Because many of us have probably had the experience of opening vulnerably to someone we love and that not being received, or they respond with some sort of projection of wrongness or shame. And so it is essential that we feel safe to be emotionally expressed. And safe even to trust our partner that if we forget to take responsibility, they're going to compassionately guide us back into responsibility from what we might have projected. Also, relational safety. I feel like I'm speaking more to closed containers of partners in coupleship, so I'll leave that there. And discussing how to hold space, right? So if a partner or if yourself are coming forward with an authentic expression or vulnerability, can there be a framework or agreement of how that information is shared and heard and alchemized together? So I know I've shared with my partner, I feel worried that your response to this is going to be quick. And so after I finish sharing, I'd like to take some breaths together before you respond, setting them up for the intimacy that you desire. And if emotions or triggers happen, how do we show up for ourselves and each other? If you've been listening, you may guess that the answer is anchoring in the heart. Okay. So even if something that we might judge as bizarre is being shared, we're going to land in acceptance for that. I really consider the heart energy to be a trinity, and it starts with acceptance, and then gratitude, and then love. It's not super easy all the time to jump to loving that aspect of ourselves that has violent thoughts, but we can start with accepting that aspect of ourselves. Then eventually find gratitude, and then maybe expand into love. And so there's an accountability to land in partnership. We're going to keep each other accountable to weave with this open heart space, and also to hold each other in self-responsibility, and to also be consistent with the tenderness of this exploration. And there's really a surrender to each other and trusting that redirection. Co-regulating, breathing together, not rushing the process, inviting breath. If you notice your partner's shoulders going up high or they're tightening their jaw, simply you exhaling invites their exhale. So for this presentation so far, I've been speaking to psychedelic sex sort of as a framework, not speaking to it substance specific until now. And so I actually encourage for each of you to begin your psychedelic sex exploration outside of utilizing substances. Get some reps in, grow a bit stronger with this framework before you bring in the additives. And when you do, I encourage exploring this with a trusted partner in a trusted environment. And so to me, this is just a personal recommendation. Maybe don't explore a new substance in a new environment. Maybe create a really cozy nest at home where you have your bathroom and your kitchen full of snacks, and you have a sense of where things are and where you are. And also, I do encourage to connect intimately foremost. And everyone wants to be connected to intimately in their own unique way. For me, I'm an intellectually leaning person. And so I often command people into meeting me intellectually because that's what helps me feel safe and open. But specifically, many women that I relate intimately with, they desire to be met emotionally, which I totally value and respect and desire that also. But it has also been a learned trait for me. So emotional, intellectual, physical, and spiritual intimacy. So this multidimensional intimacy involves being on the same page as your partner in this spiritual framework of psychedelic sex. Meaning we're going to take responsibility for ourselves, our triggers, our emotions. We're going to be authentically expressed and vulnerable. Agreeing to these principles. It's like intellectual, emotional, and spiritual combined. And then connecting physically through light touch, through grounding touch, through activating and warming the body so it can soften and open. Because when we can open and soften our bodies, that's really what expands our capacity to hold sexual energy and leads us to those higher states of consciousness. Sometimes even visual, like an intense psychedelic trip. And so speaking to with substances, it can also be really enjoyable to do things you usually do in intimacy or sexuality alongside a substance. So you might always give each other a back rub, but do you always give each other a back rub on MDMA? It's a totally different dimension of sensory experience. So sensory enhancing substances, yes, they support our sensational experience, and they can also support transparency and speaking truthfully. This is one of the things that has been really expansive for me is on particular psychedelic substances, I'm just so available to speak my truth. And the fear of loss, the fear of rejection is so minimal, it's not even noticeable. And so if anything, that may be where your psychedelic sex exploration begins, in the communication. So I just listed MDMA, MDA, cannabis, LSD, psilocybin, and GHB. To me personally, these are all very sensory enhancing substances that support me in connecting to my sexuality. And they do not always support me in connecting to orgasmic peaks. I speak to many people also who are like, yo, I like psychedelics and I like sex, but I can't come when I'm on psychedelics. And I'm like, that's a great thing to track and be aware of, and TBH, me too. That's okay, that's leading us to a different type of exploration where we can really release the expectation and enjoy the journey. It's not about the chase. Okay? It's about every moment in between. And I want to speak to this bottom bullet first. Experiencing anxiety, paranoia, nausea, discomfort. Zoom out again. Thank you for showing me where I can become more integrated. And sometimes we can't jump straight to gratitude, so we start first with acceptance. I can accept that I'm not feeling great right now. Okay. Maybe I accept that I can't yet accept that I don't feel great right now. So these experiences expressed as energetic or physical symptom or ailment, in my personal perspective, are a compass leading you to where you can anchor back into your heart. And as you familiarize yourself with the chakra system, and if that's something that feels curious to you, if you're feeling tension here in your upper abdomen, how does that make you feel? Angry? How does that anger want to move right now? It can always lead you on a journey of emotional release. Allows you to open wider. The experience of discomfort on psychedelics or in a sexual context is common. I spoke to how your energy body opens so wide when you're on this medicine. It also allows you to drop into deeper layers of unprocessed stuff. So releasing the story, you might be in proximity with a dear beloved who you're so attracted to and so turned on by, but you feel illness. That's not going to make sense. but it's a good thing it doesn't have to. You don't have to figure it out to liberate it. And again, if your partner has agreed to this framework, then you can actually collaborate and together bring compassion to that energetic or physical discomfort and witness its transformation, allowing you to open even wider to each other and to the godliness and holiness and sacred in each other. I also want to note that there's sometimes a projection on the psychedelic substance. Oh, I don't do MDMA because it makes me sick. Or like, I'm just throwing that out there. But what if there is a new relationship for you to find with feeling sickness? And as we explore psychedelic sex, we land in these intentions of love and unity and expansion and liberation. And so if you in partnership and your exploration agree to these intentions, then if we notice contraction within ourselves or within each other, we can note that. And where we hold contraction is always leading us to where we can expand. I'm pretty much speaking to recreational substance exploration in this talk. And personally, if the exploration of sexuality is desired alongside psychedelic substances, I'm going to personally say that for me, what has worked, lower doses allow me to stay present and stay connected to my sensory experience and stay connected to my heart. Just generally, across the board. I mean, microdosing LSD, microdosing psilocybin, you're not going to choose wrong. You're just going to be guided in a new direction to expand your compassionate heart space. And treating this sexual exploration as we would ceremony or ritual, integration is essential. And even beyond the substance, even beyond the sexual experience, those energies are still landing. And so aftercare, replenishment, hydration, I feel substances really attune us to our body's needs, so listen close to them and honor them. Relaxation, that might be taking a bath or laying on the earth or laying in bed. Reflection with oneself and with each other. Journaling, audio recordings. Taking note of your insight and discoveries. And perhaps not just once, but you might continue to reflect. So the next time you enter this intentional space, you know what you received, you might know what you want to change, and you can bring that forth as you set your next container. And dropping back into your heart space, neutralizing all judgments of the experience, and every moment you remember that you can. You may have caught the air of this non-dual perspective that I've been weaving with, where none of what you experience is wrong or bad, in my perspective. It's simply where liberation and expansion can be found. And psychedelic sex is a powerful medicine journey. So please be gracious with yourself in the process. And that is all for my presentation tonight. I thank you all for listening closely with me. Take a moment of reflection within yourself, just inquiring if there's any clarity that's desired, if there's any questions, just letting them rise to the surface. And also acknowledging yourself in gratitude. Thank you for opening to these new ideas. Thank you for being courageous to expose yourself to this information. And as you feel landed in gratitude, you can open your eyes back up to the space. Thank you, beautiful audience. I feel sensitive, like there's questions that people feel shy about, and that's okay. But if we do feel complete, I totally honor that flow and want to close out with gratitude from myself to you. Oh, I see a hand.
I'm really curious about your relationship with your boundaries and your limits. Like when you feel like you've reached a boundary with, I guess maybe your capacity to receive other people or be around other people, and where you find yourself capable of expanding your comfort zone or understanding and respecting a hard boundary within yourself.
Great question. Thank you. I feel that it does start with my own self-awareness. And I have personal boundaries and professional boundaries. And it's like a Venn diagram where there's a vesica in the middle where some of them line up. And if I'm exploring something new, I feel like I usually narrate that with the person I'm relating to. Like, this is new for me. And I'm a person that leans into my discomforts for sake of expansion and healing and learning. And so I may have a request to move slowly. I may have a request to breathe together throughout the new experience. You know, it's very specific to what the exploration is and the degree of relationship with that person. And it, to me, just comes back to two things: the softness and the openness of my body. If I start to contract in fear or tighten, that's a cue for me to come back into co-regulation and softness and openness. And also, if I feel an empathic sensitivity to their speed or their angst or their disembodiment, then that is also going to be a cue for me maybe to interrupt, maybe to redirect. And often with people who I'm exploring intimacy and sexuality with, there is an agreed upon framework of this surrender to each other. Either of us at any moment can redirect, can ask for pause, this sort of thing. And as far as hard no's, I have many of them professionally. And personally, this is interesting and vulnerable to say, but it is just moment to moment about energetic attunement and how things feel. And so I'm not holding anything in my system that's like a hard no personal boundary. I do have preferences and places that I would like to begin. And I also feel very empowered in my voice and in my will and my willingness and courage to interrupt, redirect, speak my truth in any moment. So that's what came through in response to your question. I hope that you're able to take that and apply that to your relationships in the way that fits for you.
So when you were talking about taking the personal responsibility and switching the narrative from victimhood to kind of owning your own reactions to things, your own feelings, and having that be yourself. So for myself, that feels authentic and good. How do you have the conversation with your partner? Like it feels, I think if both of you agree about that, that feels good. But if your partner doesn't already have that sort of in their makeup, how do you begin that conversation?
I have a few different responses. So for me, it's always about narrating your personal felt experience. And it might be, for example, it's painful for me to hear you continuously harp about this topic. Or it's hard for me to hear you every day talk about this challenge. And inviting an alternative perspective. Are you open to there being another way to approach this situation? Are you open to exploring a new mental framework that you may perhaps find empowering? This is my first response. If they respond with no, that's okay. This is now your discernment of boundary. How much are you available to continue to hold space for their story of victimhood? Even if you love them dearly, it's okay to not have capacity to hear them complain. And so this is the courageous one. Again, I'll emphasize in long-term partnership to create those new ways. I think this is my last response to this question. Inviting them into mediation or like a triangulation with a third party, whether that's someone like myself or another professional or therapist. It's sometimes hard to hear it from the person who's closest to our heart. And it's sometimes easier to hear it from an outside perspective. And so maybe that's the trajectory, asking them if they're open. If they answer as no, setting your boundary, and then potentially inviting them into a healing opportunity. Another piece I'll mention is sometimes people express, and you don't know what their point is. And so inquiring, are you wanting me to respond or reflect, or are you just wanting to be heard right now? And if they're just wanting to be heard, again, you do have discernment of how much you're available to hear. I'll also share that there is an artistry of embodying what really works for you. And I know you personally, so I know that you do that. But just speaking to the audience, like continuing to dial those attributes that you want to see in others, let that be really bright within yourself.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation. My question is, you went over something about kind of like different kinds of intimacy, like intellectual intimacy, physical intimacy. And I never really thought of intimacy as like having so many dimensions. I mean, I kind of knew that after going, oh, what did I do? And then going, oh, okay. But could you elaborate a little more on that? I'm curious about your experience. I'm kind of thinking love languages, but anyway,
Totally. That's a model that's totally related to what I was describing as well. I feel like a differentiator was this concept of spiritual intimacy. So that could be setting intention together, praying, blessing together, opening into some sort of sacred space through ritual or ceremony. And that also invites a shared spiritual reality, right? And perhaps it's not shared. Perhaps someone in a partnership is within a religious complex and the other person isn't. Then there may be another way that they share spiritual intimacy. I'm just zooming into this one because it isn't directly considered, I feel, in the love language model. And generally speaking, most humans do appreciate touch. And I feel those who don't appreciate touch do have blockages based in trauma to be curious about. And intellectual intimacy to me is valuable because I like expanding my mind through philosophizing and talking about usually specifically spiritual and relational concepts. And so when I can feel met there, that's actually what enlivens my sexuality. As someone who specifically coaches men, 90% of the time, I am often teaching men how to relate through emotional intimacy to the women that they relate to. Because there is just a tendency culturally that men have drive towards objectivity and problem solving. And so that can sometimes not align in emotional connectivity. And we all have this ability. It's just a remembrance of how to find that. Yeah.
Thank you for this chance to express gratitude. Thank you so much for, I should stand up. Thank you for speaking all of these things to us and for providing language and framework. I really liked the way that you answered that question and inspired me to just say thank you and express gratitude because your words are so powerful. I would love to hear from you some more about experiences. I know my personal experiences with sex and psychedelics are mind-blowing. They're so amazing. They're so delicious that they're sometimes indescribable. And reflecting afterwards with a partner is another piece that I really enjoy, to kind of remember those experiences, because they're so mind expanding that there's often not words to put to them. So I would like to hear from you, if you're open to it, explaining how you would describe sex and psychedelics and experiences that you've experienced or others in that realm.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Thank you, Rena, for that gratitude and question. For those who are not familiar with my healing pathway, sexuality connected to the heart and psychedelics are the two catalysts for my entire awakening and professional trajectory. So it is a topic that I'm very passionate about. And I will share that I have been on the trauma healing pathway with both sex and psychedelics. And what that means to me is these things were not initially explored in a recreational way. It was always with this foundation of wanting to liberate myself beyond limitation, beyond the trauma that had been stored in my body. And so I'm really grateful to have partners who have invited me into that space and really paved the way for my growth. And I'll share that the more we practice our somatic narration of what we feel, the better we become at describing psychedelic or hard to describe experiences. And I feel, again, from the ego, we try to do it alone. And so the more that we can empathically and psychically relate to people and surrender our ego and open to the channel of how an experience wants to be described, I feel like that could be something powerful to play with as well. And it's okay also to have speechless and undescribable experiences that maybe are not to be had words for. That's okay too. I'll share that just the more we check in with our bodies and the more we're able to communicate how we're feeling physically, energetically, somatically, emotionally, it just strengthens our voice and our lexicon to be able to describe these harder to describe experiences. And maybe your expression is just, it's so hard for me to describe this experience and I want to so badly, because of the impact, and describing the impact could be a way to paint the picture of how profound the experience was.
What about somebody that, even in the solo field, has disassociation?
So I totally relate. I still disassociate. I did it a few hours ago. And this is actually why mirror work can be a really powerful practice. To witness oneself in disassociation, it doesn't last long, I feel. It really brings us back into our embodied experience. And I intuitively speaking to you who asked the question, I'm feeling just guided to share about inner child work, and that there's a little girl who's disassociated, and that's the same for me. And so my self-pleasure practice may be holding and embracing her and reconnecting to that little girl who was so overwhelmed she went out of body. And I have her with me, and she's vivid, and she's integrated to some degree. And also there is a time and place to reconnect. So outside of the genitals, outside of the breasts, just being in tenderness and in compassion with oneself first and foremost. And the mirror practice, and I'll also just wild out with this one and say being on camera, recording yourself, having some sort of selfie cam where you can see yourself in your process of connecting to yourself. And with this awareness of dissociative tendencies, also calling in the desired qualities to embody. So if we don't want to disassociate, what do we want to be? And how can we clarify and proclaim those desired qualities? In this context as well, sharing from your personal perspective, of like, oh, I'm noticing your eyes drifting away from my gaze. Like, is there something that you're thinking about right now? Just like inviting their awareness based off of your real experience. Yeah.
Okay. And the second question is, this is a personal one. I often feel discomfort, and it's actually my shoulders, during psychedelic experiences. Breathing, heart centering, stretching. Yeah. Do you have any suggestions?
Were you listing those things because you know they're my suggestions already?
These are things that I've tried.
Okay.
Working with somebody else, massage, professional, those types of things.
So thank you for sharing and for leading vulnerably with the pain that you experience frequently. I'm sorry that that's something that comes up for you frequently enough to name it. In my perspective, like massage and stretching and heart connection are beautiful things and also can be used to fix something that's broken. And so being curious about the energetic undertone in which we call upon those tools, because they can be tools and they can also be hammering in this narrative that there's something wrong that needs to change. And so you didn't like directly say that in any way, and I acknowledge that, but I would be curious for how it would feel to drop into a meditation of accepting the pain and accepting that you're in pain often on psychedelics. And if that's not available, accepting that that's not available and that might evoke anger or grief or other emotions to release. Just based off of this chakra system that I was playing with, the shoulders are often associated to the heart and to the throat. And so perhaps there is some unprocessed stuff that is desiring to be liberated. And that's often what I say when things happen cyclically. I'm like, great, another new opportunity to discover what is wanting to be released.
Okay. Usually I start with noticing. Noticing. Anyways.
Yeah, that's a great entry point. Thank you for asking. If you would like to stay connected with me in the Yoniverse, you can find me on Instagram, and this is my website. I do work with individuals and couples and people of all partnership configurations, and I do that online and in person. Thank you all for joining me. It's been a joy.